And welcome everyone to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on today's episode for Battle for the Big East, we got a Hall of Fame coach, Jim Calhoun. Coach, how you doing today?
I'm going very good, thank you. You know, it's a funny time to keep going back, but I guess it was such a historical thing that going back was necessary.
Yeah, and it's also right now it's tough to look to the future because who knows what's lo and behold for us with games being canceled last minute, to say the least.
No question. But it was Dana O'Neill, a good friend of mine, as you know, just wrote Looking Back at the Big East, and I've had a lot of comments about a comment I made, which is, what was the Big East like? It was Camelot with bad language.
You know what? Just looking at some of the, I think when you look at the personality of the coaches, because I think in college athletics, the coaches last longer than the players. The players get 4, maybe 5 years. The coaches can go on for decades, and you usually have a longer run in college athletics than you do in the pro sports. And when you look at the Big East, there was a lot of big personalities. And when I think of Big East basketball, especially at the founding times, because when you look at 1985, they sent 3 of the 4 Final Four teams from the Big East, a conference of 8. That's the gold standard for any conference, I think, when it comes to college basketball. And the first person I think of is Big John Thompson. What was your first impression of John Thompson?
Well, I met John Thompson in an unusual way. I was in Marshall, Massachusetts, at Camp Millbrook, run by Red Auerbach. Everybody that was trying out for the Celtics or veterans, he was in his second year. He was my roommate. So there's this little small cabin with this awfully big man. And, you know, at that time, he probably weighed 280, 290, 6'10".
Did you get the top bunk or bottom bunk?
I would have gone on the floor. I would never let him be on the top because I might get crushed. And secondly, you know, he's one of the more intimidating, good people I've ever met, and one of the smartest people I've ever met. But that's the first time I met John. At Northeastern, we played him to about a 9-point game. I still remember things he said afterwards, praiseworthy of a Northeastern team, played a terrific Georgetown team. And then the battles we had in the Big East were historic. We had incredible battles with Batumbo and the Dove NFL from Israel. I mean, there's great stories about those kids. Things happened during the game that John and I cleaned up afterwards between the two players. And what I'm saying to you, John was bigger than life, not just physically, but bigger than life. Incredibly brilliant man. College basketball really misses him because he was the first guy who's not worried about his career. He's worried about his kids. He's worried about the game. And I truly believe that, you know, he was against what at that time might have been the political norm, where he came out and said, no, this is wrong. The NCAA is making a mistake. They're discriminating against minorities. And I think John obviously turned out to be Proposition 48 and some of the other things that came along. John was 100% right. If John respected you, he was as good a friend you're ever going to have. If he didn't respect you, he was a tough guy.
I think too now, you know, with the whole NIL deal coming through this year, the NCAA is allowing, how do you think John Thompson would feel about that? Do you think he'd be for it or against it?
Well, I think he'd be more like I am. I'm 100% for helping kids. The day we open up Pell Grants, $5,000 or $6,000 a year for kids, and they could get independent money for studies, so they get about $8 or $9 grand a year. And, you know, along with full scholarship, that's not bad.
Nope.
Any kid who says that, by the way, I'm getting nothing, not true. For example, out of state, UConn was about $65 a year, so I don't have to be a mathematician. $250,000, you get doctors, you get trainers, you get coaches, you get thousands of dollars worth of equipment. So life was pretty good, but we needed more. And I think some of it has been good. I'm not an NLI guy, but that's just me. I have a tough time. I don't want to become like we are between transfers, phenomenal, and the idea that a quarterback can sign Ohio State, make $1 million and then leave. What? And I guess I'm old school in the sense that loyalty. And I only had one and done, Andre Drummond, but I had 18 lottery selections. Give you an idea that you don't have to run out of place. 2 to 3 years of college, especially if the kids are going to go out and make $1 million, is wonderful. So John, I think, would see the fallacy in it, because locker rooms become funny when a guy who's scoring 20 points a game is not making something. A guy who is you know, all different kinds of things happen. I'm just not as crazy about it. And I just think we're starting to look like a, quote, a minor league franchise. And there should be nothing about minor league about college. And yeah, you should play for yourself and the university. And that's the thing I worry about.
Yeah, it's also funny too. You see a lot of college that limelight can turn so quickly against you, where you can get all this money. And it's also too, if you're in charge of endorsements and the person you're endorsing is sitting on the bench, that doesn't make your brand look good. I think of the Dan and Dave marketing ploy from the 1992 Olympics, where one makes the Olympics and one doesn't. And it's like, oh, here we go. But getting back to John Thompson, you kind of mentioned the part of it before where he was an intimidating presence. How effective was John Thompson and his team at intimidating the opposition?
Well, at that time, they didn't intimidate me, and that's why John and I got along, because our teams were very physical, come at you. And my kids once quoted, you know what? They said, why was Coach so good? Because when we went to another building, Georgetown, Providence, wherever we went, we had Coach. And I think, and even more so, I think the Georgetown kids knew they had John. And John was people said polarizing. Well, if you didn't agree with his politics, and John's politics were tough in the sense of other people, but they were right. He was standing up for kids, and actually standing up for kids of color. And that's the thing that John's major thing. John said to me, I don't care what they look like, but the guys I have, I'm going to protect them. Obviously, he was great at that. And a really good coach, a really good man for college basketball. And futuristically, he's not going to be putting I don't think of the same thing as John Lewis and some of the great, politicians we have, but he's awful close to it. He did a lot of things for college basketball and for minorities in this country.
Yeah, and especially if you look at the Big East now, they have a lot of minority coaches all throughout the league, which is something I think they can be proud of. You had Ed Cooley basically come out last night and basically, take the banner of the Big East, being like, we're a basketball-only school, and we're going to be I basically say it's going to be a barroom fight this year in the Big East, like it has been many years before, but there's no bad losses. But I guess the last thing I get, you kind of hit on some terms to describe them. What words would you use to describe John Thompson? I
saw him debate people. And if you think that some of the great Black, particularly historical political figures, you ain't seen nothing yet. He was so articulate, so smart. He said things that need to be said at times, and he said them so well. And I thought that along with his basketball message, they won, they intimidated, they had great players, they played a physical style. I thought his message to America was really important. When I first came to UConn, I thought everybody was going to say, beat Providence, they're close by, beat BC. You know what they said? Beat Georgetown. Because everybody thought about John more than any other coach. Any single coach John did. I used to kid them all the time. John, some of these people are afraid of you. Yes, John, I'm not. And I said, I plan to beat you some. But I want you to know something. You've got them all scared.
He definitely did too, with that towel he had over it. And even he hasn't coached, I think, since 1999, but his presence is still felt, to say the least. But he was definitely one of those unique characters. And he did also advocate for his players. I think Allen Iverson is one player that comes up to mind where a lot of people would have stayed away from a talent like that, but not him. And Allen Iverson rewarded him on the floor with that. But we're going to change it up to another personality. I feel like we're stuck in 1985. I'm going to bring up Rollie Massimino, the former Villanova coach. How would you describe Rollie's personality?
Well, he had a caustic personality. Another guy who protected his kids like crazy, but it was all about them and the team. Terrific coach. Unfortunately for him, he was a great coach with a 40-second shot clock. And I mean that honestly. No, his style was to dictate time. He'd be like the Patriots sometimes in football, where they're going to run the ball a lot more so they don't have to expose their defense. But he could really coach. Obviously, it was a masterpiece against Georgetown for a national championship. He was a guy that came Hillside High School in Jersey, Stony Brook, worked his way up, and eventually obviously became a terrific coach, but a very volatile personality outwardly. I used to have the joke, Rollie be on the sidelines, he'd be yelling at me or someone else, and I never yell at coaches. I don't. Officials, I do. And anyways, and I still remember to this day, like someone holding him back. And I want to say, let him go. What's he going to do? If you think of the scene of Rollie, the hair all over the place and his Armani suit being ruffled up and stuff, but heck of a basketball coach. And I think that if I had a son, I know that if he was in that program, Rollie would stick up for him and take care of him. He's a very good basketball coach, certainly.
Yeah. And he made a lot of runs to the Elite Eight, which is usually easily forgotten, to say the least. But besides the 1985 championship run, which Rollie Massimino is synonymous with, like the David versus Goliath matchup in college basketball, what else should Rollie be known for as a coach?
Well, once again, it's not as useful today because people are casting up 3-pointers in 10 seconds. But Rollie in the clock, to me, like Rick Pitino came in and did an incredible job. He kind of, to me, the guy who made 3-point shooting fine in college and then eventually in the pros. And I think with Rollie, he was a clock guy. He could mastermind that clock right down to the last second, make a team feel so impatient defensively, and score a basket on them. And once again, he was a very, very good basketball coach, developed players. But if you ask me over the years, he worked the clock better than anybody probably in the history of the game.
Yeah. Now, going back to another one of those, I guess, founding fathers of the Big East, I can put that, Lou Carnesecca. And he's as you're laughing as I mentioned that name, Lou is known for the sweaters, the infamous sweater game with John Thompson. He's someone else. How would you describe Lou's personality? He seems like to be the most fun, interesting coach that was around, to say the least.
There's more things about Louis. I could spend the whole time. He never called me Jim, never called me coach. He said Irish. Hey, Irish.
It could be called worse things.
I've been called a lot worse things. You can well imagine coaching basketball in the Big East, particularly. And he was just a great guy. St. John's beat us one year, and I still remember the game by 32. And at the end, he's got 2 of his starters in, and I'm pissed, but I don't say much. I walk off, and he can see my look. Irish. I hear this voice as I'm walking to the podium. To the press room. He says, remember one thing, and it's words to live by. He's 100% right on this. You can only coach one team at a time. In other words, you didn't know what I was trying to accomplish at the end of the game. You didn't know what I was doing with my team. You take care of yours, you'll be just fine. And I honestly tell young coaches that, don't worry about the other guys doing. I never do. And I just thought that was great wisdom. But he was just such a good man. One time Brian Mahoney, one of the assistants, told me they were going to get a great transfer from Tennessee, wherever they're coming from. And Louis didn't want anybody to know. They took a ride to the beach, rolled his pants legs up, walked in the water with Brian Mahoney to talk about it. Because he said, remember, the walls have ears. Louis, that would be Louis. I mean, I'm telling you, everybody, great competitor, terrific coach. Everybody, though, in their own heart and soul, love Louis.
Yeah, it seems like he still has that, Lou Carnesecca, he still has that affection for St. John's basketball. He still shows up to all the games. They put a statue out in front of him. A lot of the former players came back, like Mark Jackson. But one of the interesting things with St. John's is, Lou Carnesecca, he used to do all his recruiting with subway tokens.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you see a change in recruiting New York City once Lou Carnesecca left St. John's? Did it become easier?
Inevitable. He had ties every part of the city. If I was to go see a kid, I couldn't get New York kids for a while. Then I got Ben Gordon, John. Got some really good. But my point is, he owned the city. Everybody owed Lou something. Might be a salami sandwich. It might be anything. You know what I'm saying? Free tickets to a game. Yeah. Louis was the mastermind of every nook and cranny of a large 10 million population city. He was a special human being, still alive. The most amazing thing to me, I found out what one of his great hobbies was: shooting guns. What? Yeah, rifles. I mean, he did that for a number of years. He's 95 now, I think, or 96. He's not doing it quite. But I always said, Louis, using a gun during a game would be dangerous.
Maybe that's why New York City has all those gun laws. Who knows?
Maybe they do.
But moving on to another one that isn't one we talked a little bit beforehand, and you got revved up to talk about this player, but PJ Carlesimo. I think he's one of the more interesting coaches. I'm surprised he hasn't found his way back to college basketball. But how would you describe PJ Carlesimo and the job he did at Seton Hall?
Well, he did a great job. Remember, New Hampshire College, then Wagner. And that's how I get the Seton Hall job. He did an incredible job of building a team. One foul call against Ramil Robinson, a Boston kid who I knew very well. John Thompson called it, one of my favorite officials, good man. And it happened. Probably away from being a guy you'd speak a lot more, but he did an incredible job at there and then got to the pros. And he told me once you get to the pros, though, life has changed. He was still single when he was in the pros. And he said to me, and it's different now, but he said, you leave in June and you see me in September. Didn't have to recruit anybody. Yeah. It's all changed today. Yeah. But he fell in love with the pros. He liked the life, and he's become a very, very good TV, radio man. Married, got a couple kids. Wife was a golf psychiatrist, and he could have used the calls. Yeah, a beautiful girl from San Francisco, and PJ is one of my favorite people of all time. There isn't anybody in your family once you meet him that doesn't become his family. Hey, how's Jimmy and Jeff doing? Hey, Patty, how you doing? My wife, and that's who he is. And he was the only connoisseur we had of food. Because he was a bachelor, we on those meetings afterwards to go out around 12 o'clock, have our nightly meal. That's what he did. And he was just a special guy. You notice he was on national teams with other coaches. Everybody wanted PJ around because a terrific basketball coach, as I said, a call away from a national championship, really restructured Seton Hall, which now is back up again. Yeah. But what an incredible guy. And by the way, he's great on radio and TV. He's done a terrific job. And his life is good. He doesn't have to recruit kids anymore, as he said.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier. I mean, the recruiting cycle is totally different now for coaches too. You're recruiting almost every year. You can't really build up as much, especially with the transfer portal and all that. But how much different would PJ Carlesimo's legacy be, if not Seton Hall's legacy, if they won the 1989 national title?
Changed. I mean, and things happen. If he'd been there 2 or 3 more times, like I was fortunate enough to go to 4 Final Fours. Okay, we won 3 of them. It's a big deal. If we won a couple, maybe we don't get back to a couple more of them. The idea about winning doesn't change you, or change the perception of you. It changes the perception of kids who want to go and play, particularly at that time, to go to schools that win it. Or in our case, we started to get second guy in the draft, Okafor, the beat. Second guy in the draft, Ben Gordon. We started to get Ray Allen. We started to get the big name players. So I think he might have stayed in college because he was a captivating guy, though. And I tell you, there wasn't a man, and I mean this honestly. We all could fight. As I said, I think the expression I used that there were 9 of us there. There were 8 jerks and PJ, and I mean that the way we fought with each other many times. I was ignored. But because I wasn't local, I was like the Boston guy. But my point being is PJ Carlesimo, I'm sure you ask anybody, one of the best guys I've ever met in my life.
Okay. And also, too, you hinted a little bit about it before. How much different would Carlesimo's legacy be if he stayed in college and he never left for the NBA?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, he always felt he wanted to do those kind of things. I had talked to him about it a few different times, but Louis loved the game, the kids, and maybe he didn't see it. I mean, to Louis, it wasn't about the bright lights. It was the guys. It was going out to have a drink after the game. It was meals with friends and family and his family. So I do think that 2 different aspects. One was the single guy on his way up. The other guy, Louis, ends up becoming, by the way, in the Hall of Fame and legendary.
Gotcha. And now the last person we're going to talk about is pretty much, if there was a Don Corleone of the Big East, it would be Dave Gavitt. Now you believe you were at Northeastern when the Big East was forming, but how do you think Dave Gavitt changed college basketball?
Well, Dave Gavitt would tell you, Jim Boeheim name is going to be in there someplace because Jim Boeheim was one of the founding fathers. He built that thing up. I know it was up in Syracuse. I know it's cold. I know he didn't want to ever leave Syracuse. Why would I want to leave Syracuse? That was an impersonation, by the way. But that's who Jimmy was. And yet he had an awful lot to do with the rise by the Dome, and Hugo Pearl and all the other different things that did happen. But Dave Gavitt, let's get to Dave Gavitt. Without Dave, none of us would have had that. He made sure I got to the league after a couple of years. He was very good with me when I was at Northeastern, kind of like a big brother. When I got to UConn, his guy was a guy named D. Rowe, who was an assistant Olympic coach, was a great coach at UConn for a while, just a legendary figure. And Dave came even closer to me, and just an incredible person. I'll tell you this much. I've been fortunate enough to get to know Obama pretty well, Clinton. I'm not dropping names. The smartest guy I ever saw in a room was Dave Gavitt. Dave Gavitt could be so pissed at you, but you wouldn't know. Later, you might. But, he just was so smart. I just did quick things. So we're at meetings, and the meetings were crazy. Imagine me, Patino, all the other guys, and we're yelling about officials and everything else. Dave would come in and say, by the way, I want you guys to know those ADs are screwing you guys. Let me take care of it. Dave then, I heard, with the ADs, those coaches are unreasonable. Let me take care of it. And Dave was there to take care of it. And my point being, when John first came, because, John's association with Providence College and Dave go back a long time. If anybody had any problem with John, they called Dave. Dave could handle it. Dave could handle almost anything, in my opinion. One of the great people. As I said, I've been, fortunate enough, like we all have in life, to meet some special people. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you right now, Dave Gavitt, he could have done anything. He really could have done anything. That special guy, he knew everything. If you had a fight with a coach, you go to the Big East meetings, you'd be sitting beside he and his wife.
That's what they said. One of the things Dave Gavitt would do, if two coaches weren't getting along, which can happen, it can still happen nowadays. I'm pretty sure it happened even back then. One of the timeless things, probably the three reasons for it were recruiting. But Dave Gavitt would put them together. Okay, here you go. Have a nice meal, kiss and make up. But I think that's one of the things Dave Gavitt's known for. I guess mediator would be the best way I can describe it, or negotiate.
Yeah, he wasn't one of those guys that come in and do this, but he'd do everything around it to make. In other words, before you sat down, he had set all the furniture for you. And by that, I mean in league and with people. And so therefore you had no choice but to conform with what Dave really wanted. Because he kept telling us, you'll all make, at that time, you'll all make a lot of money if you stay together. If we have a fight, we have it inside, never outside. He's masterful.
And I guess the last thing I would go is, how would Dave Gavitt feel today about the current state of the Big East?
Well, I think the Big East has a comeback on its way. Seriously,
I think the comeback's there. If you start seeing some of the games going on.
Once again, I saw Providence in person against UConn. Saw Providence last night with a good win. Yeah, I think it is. But you got to kind of cool it now. And, for example, get the all-league team and try to match that up with say, for example, Allen Iverson, Kerry Kittle, Ray Allen. You're talking about Hall of Famers. So we got to kind of, bring it down a little bit. But I have no doubt in my mind that the Hall of Fame, UConn is back. Villanova is going to be there. Providence is doing tremendous. The guy at Creighton is probably one of the best offensive coaches in the country. I keep going. So my point is, I do think the Big East is back. You're 100% right. But I just think you got to be careful, because what I said is Camelot. And Camelot only happened once in time. And to have all those players that you talked about, all those coaches, and you left guys out like Jimmy, for example, Boeheim, Hall of Famer. You think about it. But only because, and you're 100% right in the sense that, there were so many dominant figures, you couldn't pick one. And so but it is coming back. But I think Dave would be disappointed with what's happening in basketball, more importantly. I don't think it's healthy for the sport. I don't think the NLI is healthy for the sport. And when they start listing, you get to the fourth school the kid is now playing for, it's just a good thing. I understand kids have to leave. I understand this. But I'm just not sure. The game is heading towards, as I said, I hope it never happens because it's so special, minor league franchise, and that shouldn't happen.
All right. Well, hopefully everyone home makes a good decision and hits that like and subscribe button and follow Sports Talk Line. I'm Tom McAllister. You can find me online at defense_com, DFENDS_com on Twitter. I have Coach Jim Calhoun. Before we leave, do you have anything else to say, Coach?
Yeah, once again, I don't want to be negative, Ned, and tell you that everything's bad. No, I think kids still play. The game is a little different now. We both agree that we're adjusting to, 25-foot shots being a good shot because you're wide open, all the different things. So I have concerns about the game, but I always had a concern about it. I thought the clock at one time was 45 seconds. Help killing the game. All the different things will be fine as long as the game, the kids, and the universities. That's the special things. The great ones are going to go make their money anyways. So I just happen to believe that Big East or whatever it may be, it's still going to be a special time. And in this time with so many problems with the pandemic, it's a respite for all of us to see the kids playing.
It absolutely is. It's great to see fans in the stands and games going on. Hopefully everyone can stay safe. Coach Calhoun, thanks again for coming on. Hopefully you stay safe. And remember to listen, like you play with intensity.